When looking at 3D values, we really can't look at any kind of orientation independent of any segment position. So for example, we can't really look at how the spine is producing rotation without really understanding and then establishing how that rib cage is moving through space. So, and that really goes both ways. We can't look at position without the orientations. We can't look at the rotations without the positions. And certainly a segment we can start to explore that, but it's very much, say for example, looking at wrist and forearm data without understanding and appreciating where the hands are in space. So again, just to look at, say, what the forearm's doing and how the wrists are moving independent of how the hands have moved through space, only at best tells us some of the story. So in many ways, it's the hand position that very much influences the wrist and forearm orientation. And also that goes both ways. Is that very kind of bilateral discussion. So examples being, often when we start to see excessive amounts of ulnar deviation, is actually in response to the hands being too elevated as we approach impact. And that can also go both ways. Sometimes because we move into ulnar deviation, we start to elevate the hands. But often it's the position of the hand. We look at more, say, our anatomy, our physiology, very much the kind of neurological system, how the hand is moving through space. The idea of hand-eye coordination is the basis of movement. The wrist simply rotates to allow the hand to then move and track through space in the way it wishes. So again, when we get the kind of excessive ulnar deviation, often is in response to the hands being too elevated. Another example being when we start to see excessive lead wrist extension, trail wrist flexion, is because the hands in that kind of sway value definition are in essence too far backwards. And often then we start to see excessive supination, pronation, so that kind of lead and trail form respectively, actually comes in the hands thrusting excessively towards the ball. So we can see these connections. Excessive hand thrust can actually then be the precursor, the driver, the mechanism in some ways too. Supination, pronation through the forearm. Hand elevation can be the driver of excessive ulnar deviation, and actually then lack of hand sway or hand movement along that frontal plane can then be the precursor to extension and flexion, so that lead and trail wrist perspective. So often looking at 3D values, we cannot look at wrist orientation without hand position, because in many ways our kind of evolutionary nervous system in some ways has developed that hand-eye coordination. The wrist in many ways is simply responding to how the hand moves through space. So in many ways, hand position is what drives and encourages wrist and then forearm rotation and orientation.